Hello, this is a video about some issues that I've come across while stacking botanical images, although a lot of them are going to apply to other sorts of images too, and about what I've been trying in order to get around these problems. Now, in principle, stacking is fairly straightforward. You have a number of images, it might be 2, it might be 200, which are of a particular scene and they're focused in different places. For example, we've got 4 images here, and the first of them is focused on this flower. The second one, this leaf has come into focus and this flower is at least somewhat in focus. The next one, this leaf here is in focus, and the last one, this came into focus here. And in order to stack it, I'm in Helicon Focus, which is what I'm going to use for this video. It's my favorite application at the moment for doing stacking. And I've picked the method that I'm going to use. We'll come back in a moment to these methods. And so I click on Render. And it goes through, it looks at the images, and it produces a stacked version where the flower is in focus and the other stuff in the other images that isn't fully in focus. And in fact, there probably weren't enough images with this because although the main flower is in focus, there isn't one of these 4 images which has this other flower properly in focus. But the whole thing, there's more of it in focus than there was in any of the individual images, and that's fine, but it's rarely as straightforward as this, and there are a number of issues that can come up. One of them is halos. Now around this edge here we've got a rather broad halo where what should be in focus from here isn't in focus, and there's another one around here, a different sort of halo which is dark and narrower. And in fact, if we go back to the one we just created, which looked okay, if we zoom in on it, we can see that in fact it's not perfect because it has got these a halo here with 3 separate lines. Now you might say, well, blimey, look at it, such a magnification, it doesn't really matter. That may well be the case, but these issues, these halos, can be visible at normal viewing size. In fact, this is about normal viewing size here, and I can see a dark halo around there, so I wouldn't regard this as suitable for my purposes. Another thing you can get is that backgrounds can look quite horrible, and also they can look noisy. Other things that can happen is that details that can get lost. The individual images may have a certain amount of detail, but when you do the stack you suddenly find that some of the detail's gone. The contrast may get hyped up so it looks unnatural. The colours might be changed, and the subject might have moved, so you may get ghost images or ghosts in part of the image. Now, which of these, if any, you get, and some do work fine straight away, but in my experience that's a small minority of the images that I've been dealing with. Mostly I do get these sorts of problems, and which ones arise depend on the scene, and as we'll see, it depends on how far various bits are from one another, from back to front, and it also depends upon what method you use for the stacking. Now, in Helicon, there are 3 methods for stacking. They're called Method A, Method B, and Method C. Method C, which it calls pyramid stacking, is also used in Xerene Stacker and Affinity Pro. Method B, depth map, is also used in Xerene Stacker but not in Affinity Pro, and I think that Method A isn't used in either of those other 2, and I don't know what's used in other applications that you can do stacking with. If we go and have a look at the help for Helicon, if we look here at rendering, we find an explanation of the methods. And I mean, you can read what it says. Some of it's not exactly clear to me what the implications are from just reading it. But it also tells you which method is good for what sorts of circumstances. For example, if you have multiple crossing lines and complex shapes, then Method C is good. Method B is bad, and Method A is okay. If you've got images with a highly reflective surface, then Method C is bad, and Method B is good, and Method A is okay. If there are a lot of images, Method C is good. If the images are not in order from front to back or back to front, then Method B is definitely bad, and Method C is not so good at preserving colour and contrast. There's also, if we go back and have a look at Helicon, if we look at Method A here, there are a couple of parameters, radius and smoothing. Again, we can look at the Helicon help, and this tells us about the parameters. And by the way, if we just go back, Method A and Method B both have these 2 parameters. Method C doesn't have any parameters. So if we go back to the help, the radius parameter is, if you have a small radius, it's good for detail. However, you may get more halos if you do that than you would otherwise. On the other hand, if you increase the radius so as to decrease the halos, then the amount of detail will decrease. Smoothing is somewhat similar. I found the explanation a bit difficult to understand when I read it, and I'm still not quite sure. In fact, I tend to, at the moment at least, to leave the smoothing alone, but I'll probably experiment more with that later. If we go back now and have a look at the stack that we just did, which had this halo here, we used method C. I'm now going to do it again, this time with method A, and I'll put the radius at 20. So I'll tell it to render it, and then we'll have a look at that area where the halo was before, and the halo's gone almost completely. I think it's gone. That's fine, but sometimes it's not as simple as that, and there are 3 techniques that you can use with Helicon, singly or in combination. One is to paint something from one of the individual images onto the stacked image. you can use two different methods, like I use two different stacking methods here, and you can combine the results of them, or you can clone. In the stacked image, you can clone like you would in Photoshop or Affinity or whatever, in order to copy what's in one area to another area. So let's look at painting from individual images. What I'll do is to load up these flowers, and I'll use method C on these. Tell it to render. Now these images were captured. It was a little breezy, and this is the best example I've got of that. I haven't actually got any really good examples of subjects moving around, so you might have to use your imagination slightly with this. But I think that this flower is not as sharp here. In fact, there's a slight halo around there I can see, as it is in this individual image. And we can, on the right here, we've got the list of individual images, and we can go through them. So I'm going backwards through them at the moment, and as I go backwards, the focus is changing to the background. If I come forwards again now, and the focus moves forward. So this is the image right at the front, where that particular flower is best focused. And so what I can do is retouching, and I'll use the brush up here to copy parts from source image to resulting image. And if I zoom in on it, now I can change the now what's happened is I'm in the wrong image on the one I want to copy from is in fact the one at the front, so it's the one at the bottom of the list there. And I can now copy from, there's a circle on the left, and that will copy into what's in the circle on the right. And as well as being able to zoom in and out on the image, in fact if I go there I can move it around, I can also alter the size of the brush that I'm painting with as well. And I can go in very, very close indeed, if I feel the need to, and I've got the patience for it. So if I just paint over this, now it may not be very apparent on the video, but in fact that's different from what it was before, and it now looks the same as on the left. And obviously if you've got, say, an insect with an antenna moving, you can, if you've got the whole antenna in one image, you can copy it from sort of one position rather than having a ghost image of it being in 2 or 3 different places. Similarly with flowers, these were blowing around, and if they'd moved more you'd be able to see that I was just choosing one of them. In fact, up here there's now what's happening here of course is that in this particular image the area behind this particular flower is out of focus. So in fact if I paint now, I'm going to wreck the background up there in the top right hand corner. So if I did want to do that, I might have to make the paintbrush very small and just do it like that. So that's painting from one of the individual images onto the stacked image. I haven't been doing that much. I haven't needed to yet. One other thing with this painting before we go away, if we look, for example, over here, the image that we've got at the moment is focused at the front, and so the background is out of focus. If I wanted to work on the background and I wanted to use the image or one of the images close to where the background was in focus, I can get it to go by moving the cursor to the area I'm interested in. I can get I pressed the F9 key, and that made the left hand image, the individual image, jump to the one that I was pointing at here on the right. And you can imagine if you've got 200 photos that you've used for a stack, that could be quite useful in helping you to get at least near to the one that you wanted to work on. Let's now look at combining two methods. So I'm going to load these now. And this time I'm going to stack them with method C. Now I'm going to look at this area down here, and it's very faint. I'm not sure you're going to be able to see it, but there is in fact a halo there, and you might think, well, blimey, again, nobody's going to notice that. Possibly so, although I have to say that these halos are more noticeable than you might think. In fact, I can see that. Yes, I can see that halo now. Again, that's one where I wouldn't regard that as being acceptable for my purposes. So what I'm going to do now is to use method A, and I'll turn the radius down and tell it to go, and this time when it's done it, it's working its way down the list on the right at the moment. There are 18 images that it's dealing with. If we have a look now, there's still a halo there, and it's a different looking halo. In fact, it's just detached a bit from the edge. So I'm now going to use method A again, but I'll put the radius up to 20. Off it goes. And when it's finished, and we can see down at the bottom what the progress is. And by the way, above this we can see the previous versions. I'll come back to that in just a minute. If we look at this one we've just done and look at this same area down here, the halo's gone now. So you think, well, okay, that's it, that's good. Thing is, I'm just going to use method B now and put the settings back, the radius back to 3. Tell that to go. While this is going, by the way, and we can see it building up here, you can carry on doing other things. So now the one that I've set off is still going, but I'm looking at the one I did before that, and now I'm looking at the one before that. So I click down here and go to the one that I've just done. Now if I zoom in, it's a bit dark. By the way, you stack these images as they are. I suppose you could process them first, but the way I do it is I stack them first, and then I'll send the stacked image off and post-process it in Lightroom or SilkyPix. And so we're looking at the method B one that I've just done, and I'm going to go to the method A. Now let's make this a bit bigger and have a look at this area here, these three things here. I'm going to go back to method B, and you see there's a lot more detail in there. Back to method A. So you might think, okay, well, we'll use method B instead, except that if we look over here, it's got a really nasty halo over there. So we've got it, the flower is sharper, but the background doesn't look good, and these backgrounds, as we saw earlier, can look really horrible. So what I'm going to do now is to combine the flower from one of these images with the background of the other. So I'll start with the one where the background is okay, and that was this one, method A with the larger radius. I'm then going to say I want to do retouching, and I'm going to use another output as a source, and I'm going to use method B, which was the one where the flower was sharper. Now if we go in here, on the left I've got the method B one with the better flower, and on the right I've got the one with the smoother background. So if I move that over that area, you can see that the detail is better in there now. So what I can do is, I'll make that a bit bigger, and paint around here, and that flower will now be sharper. In fact, this one will as well. So I've now got the sharpness from, or the detail, the clarity from one method, and the smooth background up here from the other. You notice when I move the paintbrush across, the background goes nasty because that's how it was in the one that I'm painting from. In fact, I might accidentally paint that. Of course, that's become horrible now. So I can click on this eraser and paint back over it again with the eraser, and it's gone back to how it was before. So I can rescue it from mistakes. That's good, but sometimes that's not enough either. What we'll do now is look at another example, and I'll show you what the problem is before we start. Here, this is a one-to-one view. It's quite magnified, but here we've got a definite. We've got this halo around here that we looked at earlier, and here is what the image looks like. One of the very thin slices of image, one of the images with a thin slice, where this pink lip is in focus there, and we can see that the leaves behind are out of focus. Then if we look at the next one where those are in focus, of course the part in front of it that was in focus before is now out of focus. The trouble is it's also bigger than it was. Now you're probably not going to be able to see this, but if I go backwards and forwards, the out of focus one is in fact bigger. And so that's hiding the in focus part of that leaf, which is why we've got the halo there, because there isn't an image where this area here is in focus, because by the time this has come into focus, this has gone out of focus and expanded. And this is a quite general problem, and I come across it a lot with these botanical images. Here's another rendering using different stacking, and there's a different halo this time. Now, it is possible to get rid of all this stuff. Here's the image as I ended up with it, and if we look down at this area down here, the halo's gone. So how did I do that? What I'll do is to load up the images that I used for this, and there are quite a lot of them. In fact, there are 90. I'm going to stack them using method C. So I'll set that going. And I'm also going to stack them using method A with a big radius. I'll tell that to render. Now you can have lots in this list and just go away while it's doing things if it's taking a long time. Especially if you're using raw files, it'll take longer because it has to read the raw file raw files first before it starts actually processing them. With JPEGs it's a lot faster, but even so, as you can see, this is going to take some time, so we'll come back when this has finished both of them. It's finished rendering them now, and this version, done with method A, has a lovely smooth background, but it's very lacking in detail. The other version, with method C, has a noisier background, but it has nice detail. So what I'm going to do is to start with the one with the smooth background, then say I'm going to do retouching, and I'll use the other one to do the retouching. And what I can do now is to paint from the one onto the other, and if we have a look, you can see that the sharpness is improving a lot. If we go up the top here, now the problem is that if I go over the edge there, the noise from the version C stack is going over the edge there, and that will actually create an edge effect there, which I don't want. And one of the things I can try to do, although it isn't going to be terribly successful with this, is to use this color tolerance. If the color of what you're painting on, what you want to paint on, is nicely different from the other one, if you turn this color tolerance slider down, then you can affect one, and I'm affecting the area inside without affecting the outside, and so that can be helpful. And there's also the brush hardness, which is as with other cloning tools, if you've got a very hard brush, it leaves it's like a stamp with a sharp edge, and I'll just go backwards, and if you soften the brush, obviously it has a less obvious impact. Take those two back. What I find I'm doing a lot of the time is actually making the brush pretty small. With the hardness, I have a pretty hard brush and lots of color tolerance, so if I go over that edge it's going to show, but it's, in fact I might use a slightly softer brush, but I find there now there's actually a problem on that edge now, but that's the sort of thing that I do. So you've got the color tolerance and the brush hardness. So that's painting on the detail from one to the other, but that isn't going to help with this halo, because if we go back in there isn't an image, any image, which has that detail in it. So I'm going to have to use cloning. So if we go in and have a look here, make that smaller. Now there are two sorts of cloning. You can do what they say, paint with a pattern. That is, you say here's an area I'm going to take something from, and I'm going to use the same thing over and over again. Oh, and I've still got a very hard brush, which is not making a very nice impact, but you get the principle of how that one works. Just take them back. Let's soften the brush up. The other thing you can do is to clone an area. Now I always get this the wrong way around, where you start, I think it is, where you want the cloning to take effect, and then you go to the place you want to get it from, and you can then, the two move together. And I haven't got it lined up properly there, so if I was to do that again and say I want to clone there and I want that in there, and I've made a right mess of this. Oh, I don't know, I want from there. As with other cloning, you can spend ages trying to do this, and indeed that's what I did do, that sort of approach. One other thing while I'm thinking about it, you can paint with just the texture so the colours don't change. In fact, what I've done here is made an indentation there in the yellow by accident. If you just use the texture, that can help, although it doesn't look as if it's doing a very nice job now. And you can also use the colour tolerance. If you turn the colour tolerance down, again, that might help a bit, although when I was trying this earlier it didn't. Basically, it's pretty fiddly, and I did get to the point of making it look, I thought, tolerably okay, but it took a huge amount of time. And that's one of the things about this stacking, that I've got some results with it that I simply couldn't have got otherwise, and some results that I actually rather like the look of. But it can take an inordinate amount of time, and sometimes I think, not sure this is really worthwhile. So I think it's something for me at least to keep for well, special occasions, possibly. Don't want to lose track of the fact of the nice images you can get just using single images, and of course there you can deal with a lot more images. And I think with this stacking you need to take it image by image. They all seem to be different. You sometimes have to try using a number of stacks to see what's going to work and what isn't, and you have to be a bit creative about combining them, and combining that with taking stuff from an individual image and then painting and cloning where none of that works. But you can get things which would otherwise be impossible. Well, that's it for now. Goodbye.